Legal fiction is an abstract term to explain a concept, and so is the term strawman.
With debt collectors, people assume when a debt collector comes round that they have actual power. They don't. They have no power whatsoever. They only have the power that you give to them.
What are you doing? Film this, please. Don't obstruct me. I'm not obstructing you. Right. Show us the warrant.
So we don't consent. You need our consent.
That's the end of it.
Do you mind telling me who you
I
are?
won't tell you anything.
So you're a police officer enforcing laws, but you don't know every law, is that right?
That's correct.
90% of the crime, or 99% of the crime they perceive that is crime, is actually called victimless crime. There is no victims, and crime can only exist if there is a victim.
You know, we've seen police officers more interested in becoming debt collectors and enforcing policies, you know, such as speeding tickets and fines and things like that, because they're easy targets.
Once you comprehend the difference between lawful and legal, and ultimately what your legal fiction strawman is, the fear of debt collectors, police, and authority just goes away. If you live in the UK, you are led to believe that the Queen is the only sovereign. This is wrong. The Queen is given authority through the coronation oath. Her oath was a binding contract between the Crown and the people of this nation. This means that we, the people, gave her her sovereignty. And as everyone knows, you can't give away something you do not possess yourself. That means that each and every one of us is sovereign. We each have supreme, independent authority over our own flesh and blood human body. The problem is, we have forgotten we are powerful. We have forgotten that we belong to and are part of one of the most amazing species that to our knowledge has ever existed. We have become media obsessed, and in turn obsessed with our own appearance and the way people think about us. The TV is king, but now that is slipping to the constant need to be in touch with our friends. Everything is about fear. Fear of debt, fear of terrorism, fear of ill health, or fear of climate change. This keeps us thinking that we need our government to protect us and rule us. With all this distraction, it is no wonder that most of us didn't notice the massive fraud that our countries and nations around the world have pulled on us. But as you will learn, government is a creation of man, and a creation of man can never be above man. They always need your consent, and this is where your power really lies. With knowledge always comes power, the power not to fear, the power to take a stand against anyone or any corporation that threatens you, the power to say no. It has been said that you need to know that you're in a cage before you can escape from that cage. Let's look into how you're being tricked and how your power is being hidden from you. If you've never heard of the terms legal fiction or strawman, then what you're about to learn is something that sounds so astonishing that it couldn't possibly be true. If I were to tell you that paying your tax, getting a driver's license, registering your car, paying fines, and attending court are all optional and that you are conned into agreeing with them, what would you think? All statutes and acts are optional too. Your strawman is a fictitious legal entity created at your birth through your birth certificate and the registration of that birth.
Now, in a game of Monopoly, you actually have a little token like a dog or a battleship or a hat, you know, like a little top hat, and you move it around the board. Now, I believe that they actually give us a fictional entity which we can actually use or not use. And I believe this is and a lot of other researchers do as well, that this is your name in either uppercase or with a title.
That when each person is born, whenever a human being is born, there's two entities. One is the real entity, which is the human being, the flesh and blood. and the other is a legal fiction, a fictional entity that is nothing more than a piece of paper, the birth certificate. Again, we're duped into believing that these are one in the same, and so we're tricked into representing the legal fiction, the straw man, that birth certificate. So when people get fines and things like that, it's actually consulting the legal fiction, the non-existent entity, the corporate entity that is owned by corporations.
You have any interactions with the bureaucracy, okay? They're not interacting with you, they're actually interacting with your legal fiction, because they can't deal with a flesh and blood human. Yeah, they have to deal with another corporation.
When you start to break down the words that we use and you start to look at the roots of all these words, and you actually look at where these words, what these words actually really mean, you start to get an idea of what's going on. The word corporation is very, very specific, because it's corp and oration, it's dead speak. So a corporation is something that's dead. It's an entity that exists only in a legal framework. It doesn't exist in any other framework at all. It only becomes an entity through legal mechanisms and legal means.
In essence, when you were born and far too young to understand, a company with your name was created through your birth certificate. When your parents registered your birth, they actually created a company and handed ownership of that company and you over to the state. It is important to remember that your parents were tricked and had no idea this was happening. This is why the state can take children from their families and it not be classed as kidnapping. They own your child.
They own 1/10. Because they registered the child, they have 9/10. Possession is 9/10 of the law. But there's 1/10 floating about somewhere. And the government have claimed that 1/10. So when the child, because I've had it from social workers, at least now 3 social workers on separate occasions have come out of audiences and actually said to me, you're right in what you're saying, is because we have to get the birth certificate within 48 hours of taking the child. And if they can't get the birth certificate, they have to reapply to be able to get the birth certificate. They have to get it, because that is proof of who the slave is, what the slave is. And actually, in legal terms, they're actually only entitled to the birth certificate and not the child. To take the child on the pretense that they are this legal personality is theft. So in legal terms, it's kidnapping. But the social services can use legal kidnapping, because everything is okay as long as it has the stamp legal applied to it. That includes war, genocide. Anything is okay as long as it's okay, it's legal.
The same thing also happens when you register your car. You get a document back saying you are the registered keeper and not the registered owner.
So yeah, obviously we've just spoken about registering children, and the other thing that we register though is our vehicles. And obviously either of those can allegedly be taken off you at some point in time, which is quite interesting. The 2 registered items are the things that can be taken.
You are the registered keeper of your car. You're not the owner, you're the keeper in their eyes. Now they'll argue that point, and a lot of people will argue that point, but it's quite easy to quell this argument and say, well, okay, if you don't put tax on the car, then they'll come and take your car. Now, in the legal world, taking anything from someone without a legal mechanism to do so is theft.
The legal system cannot deal with humans. It can only deal with pieces of paper. Only common law can deal with humans. So at your birth, they created a piece of paper with your name on it, in capitals, just like any other corporation. This is done to dupe you later in life into thinking that you are the legal entity and not you. Then imaginary penalties and cost are imposed on the straw man, and you, thinking you're it, pay them.
And it's kind of like an overcoat, this legal fiction. You know, as soon as you put it on, as soon as they invite you to put this overcoat on, and you do so, now they can grab hold of the overcoat and throw it in jail with you in it. But until you put that overcoat on, they can't do anything to you because you are not that name. You know, you think you are, you know, you're taught you are, but you're not.
The deception is done through the manipulation of words and language.
But that to me is legalese. It's just jargon that no one really understands, and because no one really understands it, no one ever questions it. We basically have a discussion that everybody is taught incorrect, but because everybody's taught incorrect, they believe it's correct.
Legalese is a whole language of its own. It's a complete legal jargon that's not really designed for anybody to understand it other than those that are supposedly supposed to be enforcing it. And it's something that's so complicated that not even police officers understand what they're saying.
What is wonderful is that they create their own language called legalese, and it has a completely different interpretation from English. You know, we're supposed to have you know, this sort of understanding that we were within the law, and yet they're not even using the same language as we are.
The easiest way to understand legalese is to realise that there are many English words that have more than one meaning, depending on whom you are talking to. If I were to ask you what a person was, you'd probably say a human being, but that's you or I. If you were talking to someone in the law society, i.e. a police officer, lawyer, judge, etc., they have a different dictionary to you or I, and person could mean company or corporation, i.e. the legal fiction.
You know, if you tell a lie often enough, it becomes truth, or certainly the perception of truth. So legalese is jargon that nobody understands other than those who actually come up with a jargon that really, really deeply understand it. And even police officers don't understand it, or magistrates, or even judges for that matter.
Tax is probably the best way, the only way better than fractional reserve banking to starve a community is taxation. And it wouldn't be that case if the tax was actually spent on the people and on the land, but because it's not, it becomes a starving of the people. This again comes back to corruption. And tax would be fine. We'd be living in an amazing health service, incredible roads, all the rest of it, if all the money that went into the taxation pot was paid for what it was supposed to be for. My understanding is it isn't. The problem that we have is the implications for its non-use is that, other than fraud, it's the only debt that can deprive you of your liberty. It's the only debt that they can put you in jail for is tax evasion or tax fraud, which is pretty serious really, because you can ignore as many credit cards or loans as you like and you can never be put in jail for any of that. But if you try and not pay your tax for a while, they'll really like to let you know about that. Funny thing is, I don't see many representatives of people like Amazon or big corporates that aren't paying their tax in the slammer. Maybe they should be.
Income tax in the UK first started in 1799 as a temporary measure to cover the costs of the Napoleonic Wars. It is still a temporary tax today, which expires each year on the 5th of April and has to be renewed as a provision in the annual financial bill. Income tax was withdrawn in 1816, but was re-established in 1842 and has stayed since. Because of this, human beings are the only creatures on the planet that pay to live on it. The government does not own the product of your labor. If they did, you would be a slave. Since they do not own the product of your labor, then taxation can be defined as theft, or more accurately, extortion and blackmail. No man can own another, so no man can own the fruits of another man's labor. Most people will argue that it is a necessary evil, and that it's legal because the government say that it is. How else would we pay for hospitals, police, roads, and so on? Well, reaching into your own pocket to help a good cause is noble. Reaching into someone else's pocket under the threat of force is despicable. Here is a quick analogy. I run a construction firm, and I knock at your door and demand £10,000 to build an extension, or I'll take all your stuff and throw you in a cage. Essentially, that's what the government do when they tax you. They say they're going to supply you with services and protect you, but if you don't pay them, just like the mafia, they are the ones that come after you and use force and violence to get the money out of you. The trouble is, most people never look at these situations from these angles, and so rarely see the deception that is constantly being pulled over our eyes. A large percentage of all the tax you pay is used on war, bailing out the banks, and paying off the national debt. It has been calculated that 47% of all your income is spent on tax. You work 5 to 6 days a week and get to keep 54% of your wages. Then you have to pay for your mortgage or rent, gas, electricity, water, food, clothes, and that's just the basics. No wonder both parents have to work and work constantly, unlike families of just 50 years ago. You are a slave, and you are in a metaphorical cage that, just like Neo, you cannot touch, taste, or smell. A prison created by the mind of man. Governments essentially run human farms and feed you the perception of freedom. Governments do not make money within themselves. The government's primary function is to trick money out of your pocket and feed it into their business, so they can carry on with wars, deception, and human farming, all in plain sight.
They have no lawful basis for whatever they do. There's, they might claim they have a legal basis. Now, legal is a different thing altogether. It's essentially based on contract. You have to contract with them before it becomes law.
This is a prison without bars. This is a prison without big walls to keep them in. It's just a prison of the mind.
The main implication of not paying tax is that you'll grow a set of balls and you'll turn into an adult. That's the main implication.
The three functions of money are distinguished as 1. A store of value or purchasing power, the ability of an item to hold value over time. 2. A medium of exchange. Money serves as a medium of exchange, i.e., an asset that the sellers will accept as payment. A medium of exchange allows people to eliminate the use of barter. 3. A unit of accounting, a way of placing a specific price on economical goods and services. As a unit of accounting, the monetary unit is used to measure the value of goods and services relative to other goods and services. Money in its modern form arose from goldsmiths who retained gold and other precious metals in their safes, and in exchange they gave certificates to prove the deposits. People then started to exchange the certificates for goods and services. And the goldsmiths very quickly realized they could make a lot of money out of just looking after other people's valuable goods. The now no longer a goldsmith, but running a deposit facility, took in gold and other precious metals as deposit and issued deposit notes that the public used as money. backed by the gold in the deposit facility safe. The goldsmith soon realized that very few people actually redeemed the gold, and so he started to give out loans in the form of deposit notes, knowing that he only needed around 10% of actual gold in his safe, as that would cover, even on a busy day, the amount of people exchanging certificates for gold. The deposit facility would then require the loan repaid plus interest, and this was the birth of modern banking. Through the years, money has been backed by, given a store of value, by the silver standard and gold standard, meaning you could redeem the note for gold, just like it says on this US note here, if you so required. On the 21st of September 1931, the gold standard was abolished in the UK, and on the 13th of August 1971 in the United States. Since 1971, the majority of the planet now use fiat currency. Fiat currency is money backed by nothing and has no value. It only has value because it's decreed as such by the government, and more importantly, we all believe it has value. The only entities that have the legal authority to create money are the Treasury and the banks, and they create it out of nothing. Martin Wolf, the Financial Times chief economic commentator, said this: only 3% of money is physical and 97% is electronic, and this electronic money is completely controlled by the banks. To repeat again, the banks create money out of nothing and then lend it to you and ask you to work using the most precious commodity on the planet, your human energy, to pay back the loan plus interest. Money is essentially a claim on human labor and can also be defined as debt. A debt is created for you to pay back. So why don't the banks just print money and get rich that way? Well, because they need you. They need you to create a promissory note in the form of an agreement. A promissory note is a species of money, and when you complete and sign the agreement, the document now has value, just like a banknote. So, at the heart of money lending is a massive fraud. You create the money with the authority of your signature and the creation of a promissory note that the banks then securitize, making them more money. Then the bank makes you believe you have borrowed the money and requires you to pay it back plus interest.
We have become used to thinking that we have a right to all that we have, no matter what damage we do to the earth or to other people. We have become detached and disconnected from reality. We have become detached from the earth. We have become detached from the feelings and lives of people elsewhere if it interferes with our right to maintain our lifestyle and standard of living. I would submit to you that we're on a course leading to inevitable annihilation. Martin Luther King said, the issue is not between violence and nonviolence, it's between nonviolence and non-existence. Yes, I'm talking about a nonviolent revolution of consciousness.
If you were asked to ponder the one thing that matters most in your life, what would it be? Security? Money? Success? Sex? Power? Have you ever considered why? Why we crave? Do we not have enough? What happens when we have all the money, all the security, all the success, sex, power, but haven't found peace? What happens if we gain the world without an ounce of love or appreciation? We end up only wanting more. The world can't give enough of itself. When love is present, our first instinct is to give back, to help those who long to truly be free, those who desire to give back, who desire to know love. But what happens if no one truly wants love anymore? What if no one desired freedom? What if the greatest epidemic known to man has already infected the entire species? A whole race of humanity conned into believing that slavery is freedom, that fear is love, that suffering is happiness. Would you be able to recognize it if it were happening right now? Ask yourself, is it? Is this the world we live in?
What is freedom? Well, let's take a look at the Oxford definition. The power or right to act, speak, or think freely, the state of being free. But that's kind of mechanical. I really don't like that definition. So what I did is I said, okay, well, what's the definition of a slave? A person who is a legal property of another and is forced to obey them, or a person who is excessively dependent upon or controlled by something. Okay? So if you're dependent on something, are you free? No. No. If you're controlled by something, are you free?
No.
No. So if we want to be free, then maybe we need to get rid of our dependencies and the controls in our life.
Rob, in the Paget family, is an example of what happens when an average individual begins asking simple questions. Rob has removed himself from under external government and jurisdiction. No officer of the law, judge or magistrate, politician or tax agent has authority over his life simply due to a title. The land on which he lives is treated with respect and appreciation. He has drafted his own Declaration of Independence and his own Constitution. He has truly broken the bonds that fetter so many of us to dependency and dogma. However, to do this, far more than physical barriers had to be destroyed. Upon Rob's realization that he is truly becoming free, an inevitable realization of responsibility presented itself. When excessive dependence upon something is recognized within, the heart and mind revolt. The initiation of an authentic revolution always begins within the individual.
With self-governance, I am 100% responsible and 100% accountable for everything that I say and do. And that's what kind of led to us building the airship and to building a power system and living off-grid. But when we talk about off-grid, it's not just the power grid that we're talking about. You know, there's also the corporate grid. And so myself personally, I've gotten rid of the mortgage, credit cards, loans, bank accounts. I don't have any of those kind of things anymore. So I'm off of the financial grid and I'm off the corporate grid as much as possible as well. If I started like growing our own food, generating our own power, then we're not susceptible to disruptions in the grid should there be a failure. And because of its complexity, the probability of that happening is increasing over time.
The complexity of a system is a direct reflection of the amount of burden that the people are placing upon the system. Every government would have to grow if you keep placing more burden upon it. All of that burden is actually the responsibility that we no longer, as the citizens, want to take care of on our own anymore. We want our government to take care of it for us. So all of that burden feeds the system, and that's how the system grows. If a system is becoming faulty, if a system is becoming corrupt, that's because the foundation or the soil that that system has grown out of has become faulty and has become corrupt. So that's the first place that we need to start looking, is the foundation, the soil that this system grew out of. We need to start looking at the people.
There's a fellow down in the U.S., Taos, New Mexico. He's an architect. What he's doing is he's building earth-rammed houses, which are passively solar heated, out of automobile tires. And you stack the tires like bricks, pack them full of dirt, and they're backfilled, and they're completely off-grid. The sun heats the dirt, and the mass and that heat then radiates back into the house. And then in the winter time, because the sun is so low, it penetrates deep into the building to warm up the building, and in the summertime it's really high, so it doesn't penetrate the building at all, and it keeps the building cool. And you know, collect water off the roof into cisterns, and we recycle water in the house, and you know, solar panels for power generation. So the house essentially is like a self-contained ecosystem, because it collects its own water, treats its own waste, generates its own power, generates its own heat, and it's all built out of recycled materials that are abundant out in our ecology. There's automobile tires all over the place, right? So trying to build houses out of materials that you can find readily laying around. My wife is studying to be a homeopath at the time, and she started recognizing that there are a few things that are going on in the medical industry that isn't necessarily good for us. And through the process of learning about some of the medical issues that we were learning through Carrie's education, it started to wake us up to some of the other things going on in our economy and in our political system and that kind of stuff. It's not a healthcare system, but a keep you sick system so that they can make lots of money through pharmaceuticals. I held on to crap in my life, and whether it's emotional or mental, and my body had a real hard time dealing with it. You know, I've since learned that it's holding on to that stuff is what causes cancer and, you know, all kinds of illnesses and distress on the physical body. So we decided to take our matters into our own hands and be responsible rather than react to what was going on. We decided to be proactive, and so we came out while the economy was at its hottest, and we sold everything, came out here. That all stemmed really from some of the things that Carrie was bringing back from her studying, and she brought this term natural person back from school and said, "Hey Rob, you know, have you heard of this?" No. So I started looking into it and realizing that there's this huge deception going on in the political arena, well, and the medical arena and the economy and all that kind of stuff too. But my initial reaction was I was extremely angry and upset. How dare they do this? You know, they're supposed to be there to protect us and guide us and help us, not manipulate us. And that's kind of started my road towards trying to understand their system and learn what human rights is all about and what freedom is all about. Well, there's common law, there's civil law, there's contract law, there's Sharia law, there's Christian law, like there's all kinds of laws. Mm-hmm. Admiralty is just one of them. And when it comes down to it, a lot of those are only associated to activities depending on what we're doing and what we consent to. So corporations, for example, are all subject to a number of laws because they are the creation of the government. So the master gives the rules for the servant to follow. Okay? So does that apply to you? Well, unless you're a corporation or you're behaving as a corporation, the answer is no. So I asked the question, what is the law?
The history of law gives us an understanding of its evolution, which is intimately linked to the evolution of our species. The function of law does not simply govern our physical actions. We have many layers of existence, including physical, mental, emotional, conscious, and spiritual. Because we cannot escape any of these, an affliction to one of them reverberates in consequence between all of them. It is irresponsible to assume that law pertains only to portions of our lives. Law is the very foundation of life itself. All law forms today are based upon our consent. Should the people of today discover the important truth that we can say no at any time, we may find a revolution within the current system to be inevitable. There are 3 fundamental stages to our evolution: childhood, adulthood, and parenthood or leadership. A child is typified by being dependent upon external support for food, protection, and health. In the animal kingdom, the transition from childhood to adulthood is complete when the child is no longer dependent upon others to be fed, protected, and kept in good health. We are a species of perpetual children today in our society. And as easy as it would be to blame the political, economic, and societal system that breeds dependent people, it is an inescapable truth that the entire system is a reflection of the condition of its people. Seldom do we see adults today in the sense that they can govern themselves, which means it is even less frequent that we see individuals fit for parenthood or leadership. The stage of parenthood and leadership comes when not only can we govern ourselves, but when we are ready and willing to help others become self-governing. The leaders of today are unfortunately nothing more than children with adult bodies wearing leadership clothes. Our entire species is being faced with a choice: govern the self or be governed by others.
And I found a Supreme Court ruling that says that the consent of the governed is a foundational principle of democracy. Now, what's consent? Does that imply that you have a choice whether you're going to agree to that or not? And I would suggest that the answer is yes. So we all have free will choice to consent to being governed. When we do that, then we've given them permission to use their authority over us. So when we used our free will to apply for or register for something, we gave them permission to create a corporation to interact between the man and the system. And it's that corporation that the system acts upon, but because we don't know who we are, we assume or we think that that is us. So when you take a look at your credit card or take a look at your driver's license or your birth certificate or any of that kind of stuff, a lot of people, and including myself, thought that that was actually me. And that's not true. So when the courts are acting upon it, all they can really act upon is the corporation. And the only reason they can act upon the man is because we agree to be the representative of that corporation and bind ourselves to the terms and conditions of that agreement. But we can say no at any time.
In law, okay, now we're using their words. Whenever you're dealing with corporations and the government and all that kind of stuff, person means an individual or incorporated group having certain legal rights and responsibilities. Not a human being regarded as an individual, but as an individual or corporation. So they actually said, compare artificial person and natural person. So I did. So I looked it up and I compared them. Artificial person, a legal entity, not a human being. Natural person, a natural person is a human being that has the capacity for rights and duties. Just because you have the capacity doesn't mean that you're going to use your free will to exercise them. You have the capacity for rights and duties, but it's up to you to exercise them. I actually found the legal dictionary that they use in the US. So every time they argue about the definition of a word, yeah, it's a volume that's as long as my arms of books. So by curiosity, I looked up the word person. And on each page there was probably, I would estimate, about 15 different definitions with each court case. And the word person ran for around 200, 250 pages. So there was literally thousands of different definitions for the word person. How can anybody possibly learn all that in order to protect yourself? So, a sovereign, a person, body, or state vested with independent and supreme authority. So, if you're sovereign, does that mean that somebody else has authority over you? No. You have the supreme authority.
What about an officer of the law?
They have no authority over you. They're your servant, okay? But what they do is they try to get you into a contract so that you contract away your rights so that they then have authority over you. Asking for a driver's license, insurance, and registration. If you give it to them, that's a contract. You then gave them authority. Then they can do whatever they want to. We elected to take responsibility and accountability for anything that should happen, as we should, because it's our building and we're building it. So we essentially went ahead with it and waited for the county to say something. About 3-4 months into the project, we received a letter. That letter essentially indicated that we noticed that there's some development. Please stop the development until you fill in a development permit. Well, I had been studying my human rights for a couple of years at that point, so I sent them a letter essentially outlining that I am an individual, not a person or a corporation, and that you don't have jurisdiction over anything that I do. And that your letter also indicated that if I sign this, you have permission to come on our property. So that implies that you currently don't have permission to come on our property. So I essentially told them, you're gonna have to provide me with a proof of your claim that I have to follow the guidelines of the Municipality Act, and they do not have permission to come onto our property.
Now, as soon as you get away from all the people and you remove yourself or segregate yourself through a private agreement or what have you, that becomes private. Now, the Governor General and the Queen, by definition, are only responsible for the public.
Government is there to deal with the public for us, but they've turned everything public. As soon as you register property like land or vehicles or any of that kind of stuff, you turn that into a registered item which is in the public.
This is the fundamental rule of all forms of law. Without your consent, you cannot be governed. There is not a single law in existence created by man that is mandatory. There are many that give the illusion of being mandatory, but therein lies the most important aspect to all of this. It is your responsibility to investigate and understand what governs you. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, consciously, and spiritually. There are tyrannical governments that force their law upon the people unjustly. Some do not have much of a choice to move away from these areas. However, most do have a choice, yet allow justifications to keep them exactly where they are. If we were on a train track just minutes away from being hit, most of us would move, yet some have the tendency to complain about how inconvenient it is to move. There is still a choice. Human ingenuity can surmount any obstacle. The only requirement is the desire to surmount. If we are willing to complain or rebel against the system that governs our actions, we should know how and why it does so. In doing this, it is important to understand who we are, where we are, and what options we have.
Don't assault me! Don't assault me! Don't assault me!
Am I free to go? Listen, mate, I'm asking the questions. You're the public servant. Will you take your hand off my car, please? Thank you.
I do not consent, officer. I don't consent to a mention of breaching the peace. but I am sovereign over my human body, and I do not consent to any search. I do not consent to any authority you feel you have over me. I am a sovereign British citizen, and I do not wish to be searched.
I am the county court bailiff. No authority.
Excuse me, it's our right to film you. It's our right to film you. Yes, it is. Under what law are we not allowed to film you?
I'm telling you not to
Yeah, but you have no authority to tell me not to film.
Because we're in a public area.
James Parisi with the Quincy Police Department. What is your name, sir?
That's good to know, sir.
Yeah, what is your name?
Well, I don't think that by law I have to identify myself. I'm on the sidewalk minding my own business and there's no laws being broken.
You said, look mate, I can't give you the full section. Can't give you the full section because you can't expect me to know it, is your words. Yeah? And I'm saying, well, if I can't expect you to know it, you can't expect me to know it.
Over your details.
Can you show us a warrant, please?
You've got a warrant for arrest.
Can you show us a warrant, please?
Show us your documentation.
Show us a warrant, please, with a wet signature.
I'm not happy with this, mate, honestly. Okay, alright, well, am I being detained right now?
No, you're being detained right now.
Am I free to go?
Sorry?
Am I free to go?
Not at the moment, no, because I need to...
Well, am I being detained or arrested right now?
The difference between lawful and legal, as I see, is lawful relates to common law, the law of the land, the law which governs all people, the original law, which is quite straightforward. To me, it's a case of don't cause any harm or loss or damage to any person, and don't cause that to happen to anybody, and everything's good. And you know, that's pretty straightforward and simple. Everyone can understand what that means. Legal pertains to our legal system and where statutes and acts come from, and it's a system that doesn't actually relate to common law. So we've got these two systems running side by side. We've been fooled into believing that they are one in the same, and so when police are policing the streets, we're enforcing policies, acts and statutes which, when looked into, are not actually necessarily lawful.
Common law is the law of the land, and laid down over centuries of court cases in front of juries, humans making law for humans.
For the severest measure of punishment.
Common law pertains to lawful, and anything outside of lawful falls under the legal or no system at all. The legal system covers all statutes and acts and civil matters. Things like owing money to banks, not paying fines or tax. Basically, anything that isn't criminal. For there to be a crime, there has to be an injured party. In this case, a human. And there are three basic principles that all law needs to apply to. They are as follows. Do not breach the peace. Cause no one else any harm. Cause no one else any loss. Do not use mischief in your promises and agreements. Apart from that, everything else is free rein. So when you interact with the police or the court system, they will ask you for your name, address, and date of birth. This is done to create joinder between you and your legal fiction, and to trick you into representing it. Once you agree to represent your legal fiction, now they can deal with you.
They can only apply their legal mechanisms if they have the name of the slave they're dealing with. If you state, well, I don't want to give my name, then they can't apply the mechanisms to you because they have no name for their paperwork. And remember, all their systems work via paperwork. It's all paperwork.
I think you might be wanted.
Well, if I'm wanted, what's the problem?
Could be arrested.
Well, then arrest me then, innit?
I need to establish who you are.
No, you don't. If you think I'm the person that's wanted, arrest me, innit?
Where do you live? Tell me your date of birth.
What? What can you want? I want your details now. Lock me up for what? Give me your details. Give me your details. Lock me up for what? Give me your details.
Well, get my details. And I tell you this as well. Yeah, I tell you this as well. I'm not a criminal. I'm a peaceful man sitting out here. I just burn down the system of corruption and pollution that we now represent.
But in the meantime, I'll leave you to it, but obviously if there are any problems, then I might have to come back and obtain your details and speak to you further.
Look, you have no right to just leave me to it. You have no right to say you're going to come back and ask for my details. I'm me, he's him, yeah. You're you. That's our details.
Oh yeah, good. Am I obliged to give you my details?
It's no
spoken to you.
Yes.
Okay, we've asked you to leave the store.
Yes. Wait a second.
Give me your details. And you have my details.
Am I obliged to give you my details?
You're not obliged to give me your details.
Oh, great, okay.
Why?
How are you defining yourself under the sex crime definition?
Am I obliged to answer that, sir? I do not wish to answer any questions, sir.
You don't have to, I'm just asking you.
Am I obliged?
You're not
no,
obliged.
I'm not obliged. No comment.
Okay, that's fine.
What are you doing? Am I obliged to answer that, sir?
No?
No comment.
Okay. Are you going to answer any of my questions?
If I'm obliged, I will, but if I'm not obliged, then I won't be answering any questions.
Oh, that's fine.
Are you going to tell us your name or not?
Am I obliged?
And then you're getting out your van and coming over and trying to intimidate me. Go back in your van and go away, there'll be no complaints. Stay here, I'll be speaking to your sergeant about all of you.
Right, so you're demanding now, are you? Or are you requesting that I give you my details? Right, well, I would politely decline your request.
Why is that? What's your reason for declining?
Privacy.
You got ID or driver's license on yourself?
Yeah.
Let me see it with this.
Nope. Not gonna do it. What's your name and badge number?
Officer Carlson, ID 7345.
Okay. Let me entertain him or free to go?
Free to go whenever you want to.
Thank you, sir.
I'm asking you again, am I obliged to give you my details?
I'd like to, because I'm going to do a name check.
I got it.
I'd like to see if you're banned from
yeah.
this area or
okay.
whatever.
Well, I'm asking you again, I know you'd like to, but the reason, just to explain to you, the reason I don't like to give my details is because I don't trust where those details go. Do you understand?
You well know as well as I know, sir, that in order for you to ask me my name, you have to suspect me of committing a crime. You know and I know that you don't suspect me of committing a crime. You're just poking around where you don't belong.
Okay, is there a problem, officer? Constable.
Basically, under section 163 of the Road Traffic Act, I'm allowed to check your documents.
Of course you are. And I know I'm not obliged to give any details whatsoever. However, I'd like to know, is there a problem?
I don't even have to speak to you unless you're going to arrest me, mate. That's
you got some mental health problems?
No, mate. No, I just know my right to remain silent.
Yes, you did, mate. When the camera was not on, that's what you said.
Have you got a contact phone number?
Right, no, I haven't got a contact phone number. I'm not obliged to give any contact phone number. All I would like now is my card back. I'm not accepting any paperwork from you guys, and I want to go on my way. I'm going to be detained right now.
Legally, yeah? Legally, you're meant to confirm your name and address to me.
Lawfully? Hold on, lawfully? Lawfully?
Yeah, lawfully.
You're supposed to answer me. You're a public servant.
What? No, you can't see my ID. Can I see your ID? I'm glad you brought that up. Can I see your ID? I see your badge.
I'll over the vehicle. You're going to have to give me some details, okay? I don't have to give you any details. You're going to have to. Call the sergeant, mate. I don't have to give you any details.
No, ma'am, you may not.
I'm talking to and investigating something now. I can.
You're investigating me for what crime?
I didn't say it was a crime.
Okay, then there's no probable cause or reasonable suspicion for me to provide it.
Because.
And then what would you do if I was to say that I don't have a name? Like, how would you look me up or anything like that? Well, we wouldn't. Because if I stop you like this to have a chat, and I ask you your name, you don't have to tell me. Yeah, no, I'm just glad you know that, because a lot of police officers where I'm from don't actually know that. You don't have to give me a name. The only time you have to give me a name, you caught me breaking the law. Or, well no, even then you don't, because you can be booked in as unknown. I suppose, I could replace. The only time you're legally obliged to give your name, address and date of birth is when you drive in a car.
If you're pulled up by the police and the police say to you, can I have your name? And you say no, which officially you don't have to give your name. It's actually on the Metropolitan Police site itself. It actually says you don't have to answer their questions. But if you don't answer their questions, they're going to do one of two things. If you get a good copper, they're going to go, okay, not a problem, you haven't really done anything wrong, we'll leave you alone. You get a bad copper, then you're going to get dragged to the floor, roughed about, cuffs on, you'll be dragged down a station where you will be bullied and coerced into giving your name in the end. And if you don't, they will just keep you as long as they possibly can. To lock any human being in a room that they can't leave, and especially in a room that has the very, very bare essentials, is torture.
So remember, if you haven't broken any laws, no one has the right to tell you what to do. We are all equal in the eyes of the law, from the Queen to the police and to you or I, and we are all innocent until proven guilty. So if a policeman stops you in the street and you haven't broken any laws, do not comply. Always ask, am I detained? Or, am I free to go? Do not give your details and ask if you're obliged to. If they do try to search you or arrest you without your consent, tell them you are doing this under duress. If you have not broken the law, do not comply. Only interact with the police if you wish to. If you do not wish to, do not consent. The more of us that do not comply, the less likely this country will become like Nazi Germany or Communist China. The police swear an oath to the Queen, so ask them if they are under their oath. If they reply yes, they are bound by said oath and can only uphold common law.
This is certainly the most updated. When I joined it was slightly differently worded to this, but this is probably the most updated, and it starts with I, you state your name, of, you state whichever police force you are serving, do solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that I will well and truly serve the Queen in the office of Constable, with fairness, integrity, diligence and impartiality, upholding fundamental human rights and according equal respect to all people, and that I will, to the best of my power, cause the peace to be kept and preserved, and prevent all offences against people and property, and that while I continue to hold the said office, I will, to the best of my skill and knowledge, discharge all the duties thereof faithfully according to law. That is the oath and attestation of a police constable.
If you ask a policeman to say, are you on your oath, very often they change their, they actually realise what you're talking about and they change their behaviour, because their oath was to uphold the common law of the land and not the statutes, not the law of the sea, which is the law of commerce. Because we realise that everything now is to do with commerce. When the policemen stop us, you're not wearing a seatbelt. Well, who am I causing harm to? Where's the loss or damage? It's crazy.
Hey guys, so I'm here at Parliament Square for the Occupy London protest. I've just come over to a group of police officers who are protecting and serving the people today. I've just approached this guy here who obviously has his back to me now. What's your name, please, sir? Obviously you're obliged to tell me. It's your job as a public servant to identify yourself. So could I have your name, please? Okay, we have here Constable Bird. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. I have here about 200 copies of the UK police officer's oath of office. I've just asked them if they know their oath. They've gone very quiet on me. This isn't an attack on you guys, just so you know. Like, I'm not trying to cause trouble with you or anything. I'm just trying to make sure you do your job properly, obviously. I mean, some emergencies just come up, so I'm going to follow them just to see why they're avoiding my questions. I think we all know it's because they don't know their oath. But I'd like to offer them a copy just to see if they will remember why they became police officers, which was obviously to protect and serve the people of this country. But if during their programming and their training and stuff have forgotten who they actually went into the job for, I'd like to remind them. So I still have the oath in my hand. Look, you can see all the copies. They're walking away from me. They don't want to hear it. My aim at this protest is obviously to help the police remember their oath, to remember what it is that gives them this authority in the first place, and hopefully they will honour humanity and uphold. Let me just read their oath to you guys. Look, they're really walking away from the square and everything. They don't want to hear this at all. I, so-and-so of wherever, do solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that I will well and truly serve the Queen in the office of Constable with fairness, integrity and diligence and impartiality, upholding fundamental human rights and according equal respect to all people, and that I will, to the best of my power, cause the peace to be kept and preserved and prevent all offences against people and property. Sorry, where was I? Prevent all offences against people and property, and that while I continue to hold the said office, I will, to the best of my skill and knowledge, discharge all the duties thereof faithfully according to law. So could you now recite that back to me? This is going on the internet, by the way. Not even an acknowledgement from them, guys. This is what we're dealing with. They've just completely ignored all attempts and walked onto their van and gone away. What are we supposed to do? I'm not giving up. I've got about 200 copies of their oath of office that I'm going to give out to them, and I'm going to ask them to uphold it and say, will you honour this oath and remember why you started this job? And hopefully, fingers crossed, some of them remember that it's the people that they work for. So wish us luck, guys, because we're on a mission to convert these guys to truth and love. Wish us luck. Namaste.
The jurisdiction of Admiralty courts does not deal with human affairs. Only when humans, knowingly or unknowingly, represent a corporation by using licenses, registrations, certificates, and applications do they fall under Admiralty jurisdiction. It is a well-disguised fact that nearly everything we believe to be our country, our courts, our police departments, and even the documents that represent us as individuals are in fact corporations in the business for profit. Should you choose to remain a part of any of these corporations, it's important to understand that not only are you under their jurisdiction, but you do gain the benefits that they offer. The benefits in the agreement of becoming a citizen of any country is their protection. To be a citizen of any nation means that you have your citizenship. This ship is a vessel that contains your consent to be protected and governed by that nation.
When I actually got pulled over by city police, they had 2 or 3 police cars there. But what essentially happened is he came up to the window and said, asked me for my driver's license, insurance, and registration. And I actually told him, well, I don't have a driver's license. And he goes, yeah, that's why I stopped you. I'm not a corporation. And I do know that I'm not here to submit to other people's authority. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was actually testifying to him. I didn't need to tell him that I didn't have any of those documents. At that point, he then asked me, well, what's your name? Well, I told him, well, my friends call me Rob. I don't let a name define me, or I don't let a career define me. I'm not a name or a label. Again, I was testifying. I didn't have to disclose to him my identity, but it was enough information for him to make the link between that name and the name that he has jurisdiction over, which is the artificial person that was on the driver's license that was expired. And that was grounds enough for him to proceed with filing charges of driving without a driver's license. And he essentially gave me to the count of 3 to accept these, or he would continue filing more charges and tow the vehicle. And I finally accepted under, I was extremely stressed out at that point because I didn't want to lose my property and that kind of stuff. So I accepted them and decided to deal with it through letters. Like if I was a judge, for example, and you walked in and claimed that you're sovereign, one of the things I'm going to look at is, okay, has this guy behaved like a sovereign? Did he, provide me with pre-notice and, try to resolve the issue before it even came to court? And was he honorable in his communications and his interactions with people? So at that point, I started a letter campaign, writing letters to him to ask him, for proof of claim of a whole bunch of things that he was claiming over me. And he essentially ignored all of those. So I showed up in court for the plea. Okay, now I know what the plea is all about, right? So I didn't go in there with all my books. I essentially went in there to essentially say, you know what, there is no harm done here. There's no cause for this court to be hearing. The judge wouldn't hear any of that. He kept asking me for the person, Robert Ernest Page, and I kept saying, well, I'm here on this behalf, because I'm not that person. I'm man. But he finally said to me, okay, you know what, I'm entering in a plea. Well, first off, that was probably a no-no on his part.
And he told me to plead guilty. But he said that from the facts of the case, it didn't look like I had a chance.
Then he told me, make sure that that person is in court. You know, I was still nervous, I was still shaken and that kind of stuff, but I left court excited because I successfully got the judge to recognize me for who I am, not as that artificial person. But I still have court to deal with. So when I got there, the Crown called me up, so I went up there. This is before the judge was there. And he asked me for my name. I didn't give him a name. I told him I'm a third-party intervener under injury because the artificial person's being called to court, not me. But I'm the one that was injured. I was stopped, which is an injury, detained for an hour and a half, and had to go through a whole bunch of letters and that kind of stuff. So he pointed to the ticket and goes, well, is that you? And I told him, that is not me. And I think he was getting frustrated. He said, go sit down. So I went and sat down. All I know is that when they resumed court, they heard the rest of the cases, and then they called Robert Ernest Page up, and I stood up, and she turned to me and said, case dismissed on lack of evidence.
I move for an immediate dismissal. There's no sound basis for this case. There's not the slightest evidence.
We're not completely out of it yet. We still have dependencies on, you know, our internet connections and our phone bills because we still want to communicate with people. But for the most part, I've been able to unwind myself from the vast majority of all of those requirements that most people have. Years ago, I was very materialistic. I was, you know, working hard for, you know, big houses, big cars, lots of money, that kind of stuff. And then when I recovered from my depression, I realized that life is all about my relationships. Relationships with individuals like yourself, my friends and family, but also with relationships with my food or my environment. Sometimes I still struggle with that. You know, this is a journey. It's not something that's, you know, open a door, walk through, you're a changed man, and, you know, this is something I'll probably have to struggle with the rest of my life. Every once in a while I stumble, but I see it for what it is and forgive myself and just move on. And that whole entire process was a lot of hard work. Like, it was extremely painful, took a lot of energy, but I'm at a point right now where if I had to do it again, I would, because I learned so much about myself. And it positioned me very well to actually get together again with my wife. We were separated for 3 years. We reconciled the marriage, and you know, we've been going strong now for almost 10 years. I believe the solution's available for anybody, whether you live in a, you know, democratic society or under a dictatorship or whatever. I believe the solution's simple, and I believe the solution is within ourselves.
There are billions of people wandering this globe with perspective, scope, belief, dogma, morals, fears, desires, and hidden agendas. It's difficult to comprehend exactly what drives each of them. When looking at the surface of this unique condition the planet is in due to only one species, it may seem as if we aren't truly interested in freedom anymore. Maybe we're not truly working towards growth, prosperity, and peace. Again, it's difficult to pinpoint why we are a species of perpetual war and perpetual deceit, matched by perpetual heroism and perpetual compassion. There is no one answer to explain it all, and yet even if there were, it wouldn't be the intellectual answer that we desperately want it to be. The most we can do as individuals is to begin acting like individuals instead of acting like machines on autopilot from some primal program set in motion millions of years ago. What would this planet look like if we took back the one power we consistently give away? Choice. Because there is always a choice. Good, bad, indifferent, there is always a choice. Love, fear, growth, decay, life and death, there is always a choice. And the picture-perfect ending or eternal struggle is but a consequence of the direction we choose to travel from here.
So rather than looking at fear, right now, look at this as the moment of opportunity, because there's something so much better on the horizon, but we can only get there by eliminating the structure as it is now, because the structure as it is now is providing for our extinction.
Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed and to which we are committed today at home and around the world.
I had to be willing to accept what other people had to say, do critical thinking to evaluate whether it was true or not. I had to learn. I had to learn how to change. I had to face my fear and confront my fear. I had to be honest with myself, which was difficult. I had to learn how to let go. And I had to learn to stand up for what I believe. And I had to learn that it all took hard work to get through all of that.
Yes, I'm talking about a nonviolent revolution of consciousness. A consciousness that is able to understand how we're all inextricably connected to each other on this earth and to the earth itself. And that if we violate those fundamental principles, we do so at our own peril. Yes, we can continue to live in this delusion and the denials of reality because it's painful, it's frightening, sometimes it's terrifying. It's terrifying to face the truth. So I ask each of you to search your hearts as to what your truth is for being a citizen of the earth, promoting justice as a foundation for peace. It's not going to happen magically, and I think it's not going to happen by relying on these political structures and institutions. I think we're going to have to wage peace in the most extraordinary ways, whether our government wants it or not. You will know in your heart what to do, but I know that without a nonviolent revolution of consciousness, we will not survive as a civilization or as a planet. We can choose to have peace if we want to pay the price. And what more glorious goal and value do we want than peace for all people? And so I look forward to working together with you all, with we the people, to build a new society. A society that understands that we are not worth more and they are not worth less. And that we will be willing to pay the price and take the risks to wage peace with all fellow and sister human beings.